Sarah Chen had always dreamed of serving her country, but she never imagined her journey would lead her to this moment. Standing at the edge of the naval base in San Diego, she clutched her deployment orders with trembling hands. The morning sun cast long shadows across the concrete, and the sound of waves crashing against the nearby shore mixed with the distant hum of military aircraft. She had graduated top of her class from the Naval Academy 3 years ago, earning respect from her peers and superiors alike. Her specialty in underwater demolition and reconnaissance had made her one of the most sought-after operatives in her unit. But today felt different. Today she was being assigned to a mission that would test everything she had learned. The briefing room was filled with seasoned officers, their faces weathered by years of service and countless deployments. Admiral Rodriguez stood at the front, his presence commanding immediate attention. The mission details were classified, but Sarah understood the gravity of what lay ahead. Intelligence had discovered a potential threat to national security, and her unique skills were needed to gather crucial information. As the briefing concluded, Sarah noticed Commander Jake Morrison watching her intently. He was known throughout the Navy as one of their most elite special operators, a man who had completed missions that others deemed impossible. His reputation preceded him wherever he went, and stories of his courage under fire had become legendary among the ranks. Later that evening, Sarah found herself walking along the base perimeter, trying to process everything she had learned. The mission would take her deep into enemy territory, where one mistake could mean capture or death. She had trained for scenarios like this countless times, but the reality of it felt overwhelming. Commander Morrison approached her as she stood watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Without saying a word, he handed her a small communication device. His eyes met hers, and she saw something there that she had never noticed before. Not just respect for a fellow soldier, but something deeper, more personal. The next morning brought intensive preparation sessions. Sarah spent hours reviewing maps, studying satellite imagery, and practicing infiltration techniques. Every detail mattered, and there was no room for error. The team she would be working with was small but highly skilled, each member chosen for their specific expertise. As the departure date approached, Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness coursing through her veins. This was what she had trained for, what she had dedicated her life to achieving. But she also understood that this mission would change her forever, regardless of the outcome. The final equipment check revealed that everything was in perfect order. Her diving gear had been inspected multiple times, her weapons were clean and ready, and her communication equipment had been tested thoroughly. Sarah ran through her mission objectives one last time, memorizing every detail until it became second nature. Commander Morrison appeared at her side as she finished her preparations. He handed her a sealed envelope with instructions not to open it until she reached her designated coordinates. The weight of the envelope felt significant in her hands, and she wondered what crucial information it might contain. The transport vessel was waiting at the dock, its engines already running. Sarah took one last look at the base that had been her home for the past 3 years. She thought about her family back in Ohio, who had no idea where she was going or when she might return. They knew only that she served her country with honor and dedication. As the vessel pulled away from the dock, Sarah stood on the deck watching the coastline disappear into the distance. The mission ahead would test every skill she possessed, every lesson she had learned, and every ounce of courage she could muster. But she was ready, and she knew that her training and determination would see her through whatever challenges lay ahead. The ocean stretched endlessly before them, and somewhere beyond the horizon waited a test that would define not just her career, but her very character as a soldier and as a person. 3 days into the mission, Sarah found herself crouched behind enemy lines on a remote island in the South Pacific. The intelligence had been accurate. A hostile organization had established a significant operation here, complete with advanced surveillance equipment and heavily armed guards. Her mission was to infiltrate their communication center and gather crucial data about their planned attacks on American interests. The tropical heat was oppressive, and sweat dripped from her brow as she studied the compound through her binoculars. Guard rotations happened every 2 hours, and she had identified a brief window when the eastern perimeter would be most vulnerable. Her heart pounded steadily as she checked her equipment one final time. Sarah had successfully evaded detection for the past 48 hours, moving carefully through dense jungle terrain and avoiding patrol routes she had memorized from satellite images. Her training had prepared her well for this environment, but the reality of operating alone in hostile territory brought unique challenges she had never experienced before. The communication center sat at the heart of the compound, surrounded by multiple layers of security. Sarah knew that once she breached the perimeter, she would have limited time to complete her objectives before discovery became inevitable. Every movement had to be precise, every decision calculated to maximize her chances of success. As darkness fell, Sarah began her approach. She moved like a shadow through the undergrowth, her specialized gear allowing her to remain virtually invisible to the thermal imaging cameras positioned around the compound. Years of training had taught her to control her breathing, minimize her heat signature, and move without creating any sound that might alert the guards. The first checkpoint came sooner than expected. 2 guards stood smoking cigarettes near a supply shed, their weapons casually slung over their shoulders. Sarah waited patiently in the shadows, counting their breathing patterns and noting their level of alertness. When they finally moved on, she slipped past their position and continued deeper into the compound. The communication center loomed ahead, its satellite dishes and antenna arrays clearly visible against the star-filled sky. Sarah pulled out the sealed envelope Commander Morrison had given her and carefully opened it. Inside was a small electronic device and detailed instructions for accessing the enemy's computer systems. The technology was unlike anything she had seen before, clearly representing the most advanced intelligence-gathering capabilities available. Reaching the building required crossing an open courtyard monitored by multiple cameras. Sarah studied the patrol patterns for several minutes, identifying a brief gap in coverage that would allow her to reach the building's rear entrance. She moved swiftly but silently, her dark clothing helping her blend with the shadows cast by the building's walls. The rear entrance was secured with an electronic lock, but Sarah's training had included extensive work with such systems. Within minutes, she had bypassed the security measures and gained entry to the building. The hallways were dimly lit and eerily quiet, with only the hum of electronic equipment breaking the silence. Finding the main server room took longer than anticipated, but Sarah eventually located it on the building's second floor. The door was secured with both electronic and mechanical locks, representing a significant challenge even for someone with her skills. She worked methodically, using specialized tools to defeat each security measure without triggering any alarms. Inside the server room, banks of computers hummed quietly as they processed vast amounts of data. Sarah connected the device from Commander Morrison to the main terminal and watched as it began downloading critical information. The process would take several minutes, during which she remained vulnerable to discovery. As the download progressed, Sarah positioned herself near the room's only exit and listened carefully for any signs of approaching guards. The building remained quiet, but she knew that her luck could change at any moment. Every second felt like an eternity as she waited for the device to complete its work. Suddenly, voices echoed from somewhere in the building below. Sarah's pulse quickened as she realized that guards were conducting an unscheduled patrol. She checked the download progress and saw that it was only 70% complete. Aborting now would mean mission failure, but staying risked capture or worse. The voices grew closer, and Sarah could hear footsteps on the stairs leading to her floor. She drew her sidearm and positioned herself behind the server room door, preparing for whatever might come next. The download indicator showed 85% complete, then 90%. The footsteps stopped just outside the door, and Sarah held her breath as she heard the guards discussing something in their native language. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, the guards moved on, their voices fading as they continued their patrol. The download completed successfully, and Sarah quickly disconnected the device and prepared to make her escape. She had accomplished her primary objective, but getting out alive would require all of her training and more than a little luck. Sarah's escape from the communication center proved more challenging than her infiltration. As she retraced her steps through the building's corridors, she could hear increased activity throughout the compound. Something had alerted the guards, though she couldn't determine whether they had discovered evidence of her presence or were simply conducting enhanced security procedures. Moving carefully down the stairwell, Sarah paused at each landing to listen for approaching footsteps. The data she had retrieved was now stored on the specialized device, making her mission technically successful. However, The information would be useless if she couldn't make it back to the extraction point alive. The rear exit she had used to enter the building was no longer viable, as 2 guards now stood stationed there, their weapons at the ready. Sarah would need to find an alternative route out of the building and then navigate through the compound security perimeter without being detected. Her training had prepared her for such contingencies, but the reality of implementing escape protocols under pressure tested her skills to their limits. A service corridor led to a loading dock on the building's western side. Sarah moved through maintenance areas and storage rooms, avoiding the main hallways where guard patrols were most likely to occur. The loading dock opened onto a different section of the compound, one she had studied during her reconnaissance but hadn't planned to use. As she emerged from the building, Sarah immediately noticed that the guard rotations had changed. Additional personnel had been deployed, and their patrol patterns were more random and unpredictable than before. This suggested that security protocols had been elevated, possibly in response to intelligence about her presence or as part of a planned exercise. The perimeter fence lay 200 meters away across open ground that offered minimal cover. Sarah identified a route that would take her past several supply buildings and a vehicle maintenance area, providing some concealment from observation posts. She would need to move quickly while remaining undetected, a combination that required perfect timing and execution. Her first sprint took her to a fuel storage building where she paused to assess the situation. Guards were moving through the compound with increased frequency, and she could hear radio chatter indicating heightened alert status. Sarah realized that her window for escape was closing rapidly, and she would need to take greater risks to reach the extraction point on time. The next leg of her escape route led past a motor pool where several military vehicles were parked. Sarah used the vehicles for cover while advancing toward the perimeter, moving from one to another during brief moments when guard positions created gaps in their observation coverage. Her heart pounded as she realized how exposed she would be during the final approach to the fence. As she prepared for the last sprint to the perimeter, Sarah heard an alarm begin sounding throughout the compound. Her presence had been discovered either through missing equipment, security footage, or some other means. The compound immediately erupted into activity as guards rushed to secure all exits and begin systematic searches of every building and area. Spotlights blazed to life, turning night into day and eliminating most of the shadows that had provided concealment. Sarah found herself pinned behind a maintenance truck as guards began spreading out in search patterns. Her extraction window was rapidly approaching, and missing it would mean spending additional days evading capture while trying to reach a secondary pickup point. The perimeter fence was now heavily guarded, with additional personnel taking positions at regular intervals. Sarah realized that a conventional escape attempt would be suicidal under these circumstances. She needed to create a distraction that would draw the guards away from her intended exit point while giving her enough time to breach the fence and reach the jungle beyond. Her equipment included several small, explosive charges designed for destroying electronic systems, but they could serve dual purposes if used creatively. Sarah identified a communications relay station on the opposite side of the compound from her position. Destroying it would certainly create a distraction and might also disrupt the guards' coordination efforts. Moving through the compound while avoiding the searching guards required every stealth technique Sarah had learned. She used buildings and equipment for cover while working her way toward the communications station. The guards were following systematic search patterns, but their increased numbers actually created opportunities for someone who understood their methods. Reaching the communications station undetected took nearly an hour of careful movement. Sarah planted the explosive charges at critical points in the equipment while ensuring that the blast would not endanger any of the guards. Her mission was intelligence gathering, not creating casualties, and she was determined to maintain that distinction. The explosion lit up the night sky and immediately drew guards from across the compound toward the communications station. Sarah used this distraction to make her final sprint toward the perimeter fence. She reached it just as the guards began to realize that the explosion might have been a diversion rather than her primary objective. Cutting through the fence took precious seconds while gunfire erupted behind her as guards spotted her position. Sarah dove through the opening just as bullets began striking the fence posts around her. She rolled into the jungle undergrowth and began moving toward the extraction point, knowing that pursuit would follow within minutes. The dense jungle that had provided concealment during Sarah's initial approach now became a maze of obstacles as she fled through the darkness with enemy forces in pursuit. Behind her, she could hear dogs barking and vehicles starting up as the hostile organization mobilized every available resource to capture her. The data she carried represented a significant intelligence breakthrough, and they would spare no effort to prevent its escape. Sarah pushed through thick vegetation, using her training to move efficiently while minimizing the trail she left behind. Every few hundred meters, she paused to listen for pursuit and adjust her route accordingly. The extraction point lay 3 kilometers away through terrain that became increasingly difficult as she moved inland from the coast. Her radio crackled with a transmission from Commander Morrison, who was coordinating her extraction from a command vessel offshore. His voice provided reassurance that help was waiting. But Sarah knew that reaching the pickup point would require surviving. The next several hours while evading a determined enemy force that knew the terrain better than she did. The jungle canopy blocked most of the moonlight, making navigation challenging even with her night vision equipment. Sarah relied on her compass and the map she had memorized, checking her position against predetermined landmarks whenever possible. Every decision about route selection could mean the difference between escape and capture. 20 minutes into her flight, Sarah heard the unmistakable sound of helicopters approaching. The enemy had called in aerial support, significantly complicating her escape options. She immediately sought cover under the thickest vegetation she could find and remained motionless as searchlights swept through the trees overhead. The helicopter passed directly over her position, its powerful lights probing every shadow and clearing. Sarah pressed herself against the jungle floor, controlling her breathing and remaining absolutely still until the aircraft moved on. She knew that thermal imaging equipment might reveal her position if she moved too soon after the helicopter departed. As the sound of rotor blades faded, Sarah resumed her movement toward the extraction point. The terrain grew steeper as she climbed into hills that formed the island's interior. Rocky outcroppings and dense undergrowth made progress slow, but they also provided better concealment from aerial observation. Her pursuers had spread out into multiple search teams, and Sarah could hear them communicating through the jungle using handheld radios. They were conducting a systematic sweep, moving in a coordinated pattern designed to prevent her from reaching the coast. Sarah realized she would need to break through. Their search line at its weakest point, a stream running down from the hills, provided an opportunity to mask her movement while making progress toward the extraction point. Sarah entered the water carefully, moving downstream while using the banks for concealment. The current helped carry her forward, but the rocky stream bed made silent movement challenging. After following the stream for nearly a kilometer, Sarah emerged near a small clearing where enemy forces had established a temporary command post. Radio antennas and communication equipment were clearly visible, along with maps showing their search grid. This was valuable intelligence, but observing it meant additional risk of discovery. From her concealed position, Sarah could see that the enemy had correctly anticipated her most likely escape routes. Their search pattern would intercept her regardless of which path she chose toward the extraction point. She would need to find a way around their perimeter, or create another distraction to draw them away from her intended route. The enemy command post was lightly guarded, with most personnel deployed in search teams throughout the jungle. Sarah identified an opportunity to disrupt their coordination by destroying their communication equipment, but doing so would reveal her exact position and bring every available enemy soldier to her location. As she considered her options, Sarah heard familiar voices approaching through the jungle. A search team was moving directly toward her position, following the same stream she had used to reach the clearing. She had perhaps 2 minutes before they would arrive at her location, forcing her to choose between immediate flight and attempting to neutralize the command post. The decision came naturally from her training and instincts. Sarah moved quickly but silently toward the command post where 2 guards were monitoring radio communications. Her approach from their blind spot allowed her to reach the equipment without being detected. She planted her remaining explosive charge among the radio equipment while the guards remained focused on their duties. The explosion destroyed the enemy's central communication hub and created immediate chaos as search teams lost contact with their commanders. Sarah used this confusion to move rapidly through the jungle toward her extraction point, knowing that the enemy would need time to reorganize their search efforts without radio coordination. However, her sabotage had also revealed her approximate position to every enemy soldier on the island. They would converge on the area where the explosion occurred and then spread out in all directions, making her final approach to the extraction point extremely dangerous. Sarah had gained tactical advantage at the cost of strategic concealment. The helicopter returned within minutes of the explosion, its searchlight sweeping back and forth as it attempted to locate her. Sarah moved through the thickest vegetation available, but she knew that reaching the extraction point would require crossing at least 2 areas of open ground where aerial detection would be almost certain. As she approached the final kilometer before the coast, Sarah could hear enemy soldiers moving through the jungle from multiple directions. They were closing the net around her position, and time was running out before her extraction window closed. Commander Morrison's voice came through her radio again, reporting that enemy naval vessels were also moving to intercept the rescue operation. Sarah reached the coastal cliffs just as dawn began breaking over the Pacific horizon. The extraction point lay in a small cove below, accessible only by a treacherous climb down rock faces that dropped nearly 50 meters to the water below. Behind her, the sounds of pursuit grew closer, as enemy search teams converged on her position from multiple directions. Commander Morrison's voice crackled through her radio with an urgent update. Enemy patrol boats had been spotted moving toward the extraction area, and the rescue submarine would have only minutes to complete the pickup before being forced to dive and withdraw. Sarah's margin for error had shrunk to almost nothing, and any delay could result in mission failure or capture. The cliff face offered minimal handholds, but Sarah's training included extensive work in challenging environments. She secured her equipment and began the descent, moving as quickly as safety would allow. Loose rocks cascaded into the water below with each movement, creating noise that might alert the enemy to her exact position. Halfway down the cliff, Sarah heard shouts from above as her pursuers reached the edge. Gunfire erupted immediately, with bullets striking the rocks around her as she pressed herself against the stone face. Continuing the descent while under fire required every bit of courage and skill she possessed. But stopping meant certain capture or death. A bullet grazed her shoulder, sending a shock of pain through her body and nearly causing her to lose her grip. Sarah fought through the injury and continued climbing downward, using her body to shield her equipment from the gunfire. The data she carried was more important than her personal safety, and she was determined to complete her mission regardless of the cost. The enemy soldiers above were attempting to find positions where they could get clear shots at her, but the cliff's overhang provided some protection. Sarah used this brief respite to increase her descent speed, accepting greater risk in exchange for reaching the water before the enemy could bring heavier weapons to bear. As she dropped into the cove, Sarah could see the submarine's periscope breaking the surface approximately 100 meters offshore. The rescue team was in position, but reaching them would require swimming through open water while enemy forces held the high ground above. The situation had become a desperate race against time and overwhelming odds. Sarah entered the water and began swimming toward the submarine using a modified combat stroke that minimized surface exposure. Bullets continued to strike the water around her, but the distance and angle made accurate shooting difficult for the enemy soldiers. Each stroke brought her closer to safety while taking her further from the protective cover of the cliffs. The submarine began moving toward her position, but Sarah could see enemy patrol boats approaching from both directions along the coast. The timing would be critical, requiring precise coordination between her swimming speed and the submarine's approach. Commander Morrison's voice provided constant updates on distances and timing, helping her maintain the optimal pace. An enemy patrol boat rounded the headland and immediately opened fire with automatic weapons. The water around Sarah erupted in geysers as bullets struck the surface, forcing her to dive repeatedly for protection. Each time she surfaced for air, the gunfire intensified, making steady progress toward the submarine increasingly difficult. The submarine's conning tower broke the surface. Just as Sarah reached a point where the enemy patrol boat could bring its weapons to bear most effectively, she could see rescue swimmers in the water, moving to assist her final approach to the submarine. The timing was perfect, but enemy fire was becoming more accurate as the distance decreased. A rescue swimmer reached Sarah's position and immediately began providing covering fire while helping her toward the submarine's hull. Additional swimmers had deployed around the submarine's perimeter, creating a protective barrier against enemy small arms fire. Their professionalism and courage under fire demonstrated the elite nature of the rescue team. As Sarah reached the submarine's escape hatch, she could hear the distinctive sound of incoming artillery shells. The enemy had brought heavier weapons to bear from positions inland, creating a new level of threat for the rescue operation. The submarine commander immediately gave orders to dive, requiring the rescue team to complete their operations within seconds. Sarah was pulled through the escape hatch just as the first artillery shells struck the water nearby. The submarine began its emergency dive while rescue swimmers cleared the area, and the conning tower disappeared beneath the surface. The entire rescue operation had taken less than 5 minutes from start to finish, but it felt like hours to everyone involved. Inside the submarine, Sarah was immediately taken to the medical bay for treatment of her shoulder wound and evaluation for other injuries. The data device remained secure in her equipment, its precious cargo intact despite the harrowing escape. Commander Morrison appeared at her side, his face showing relief mixed with professional concern for her condition. As the submarine moved away from the hostile coastline, Sarah finally allowed herself to acknowledge the magnitude of what she had accomplished. The intelligence she had gathered would provide crucial insights into enemy operations and potentially prevent attacks against American interests. Her mission had succeeded against overwhelming odds, but the personal cost would take time to fully understand. The medical officer finished treating her wound and pronounced her fit for duty despite her ordeal. Sarah's training and determination had carried her through the most challenging operation of her career, proving her worth as an elite naval operative. However, she knew that this mission had changed her in ways that would become apparent only with time and reflection. 2 weeks after her return to base, Sarah stood in Admiral Rodriguez's office as intelligence analysts finished their preliminary assessment of the data she had recovered. The information had exceeded all expectations, revealing a network of planned attacks that could have resulted in significant casualties and damage to American interests throughout the Pacific region. Her mission had quite literally saved lives. The formal debriefing process had taken several days, with Sarah providing detailed accounts of every aspect of her operation. Intelligence specialists had used her observations to build comprehensive profiles of enemy capabilities, personnel, and operational methods. The success of her mission had already led to preventive operations that disrupted multiple planned attacks. Commander Morrison had remained close throughout her recovery period, providing support that went beyond professional obligation. Sarah found herself drawn to his steady presence and deep understanding of the psychological challenges that followed high-stress operations. Their relationship had evolved from mutual professional respect to something more personal and meaningful. As she prepared to leave the Admiral's office, Sarah reflected on how much her life had changed in such a short time. The young officer who had stood on the dock 2 weeks earlier seemed like a different person, replaced by someone who had faced her greatest fears and emerged stronger. The experience had tested every aspect of her training and character. Admiral Rodriguez called her back before she reached the door. In his hands was a small wooden box containing the Navy Cross, one of the highest decorations for valor that could be awarded to a naval officer. The citation read in part that her extraordinary heroism and complete disregard for personal safety had resulted in the prevention of significant attacks against American interests. The medal ceremony took place the following week in front of the entire base personnel. Sarah's family had flown in from Ohio, finally learning the true nature of her recent assignment and the level of danger she had faced. Their pride was evident, but Sarah could also see the worry in her mother's eyes as she truly understood her daughter's chosen profession for the first time. As the Admiral pinned the medal to her uniform, Sarah felt a profound sense of accomplishment mixed with humility. The decoration represented not just her individual achievement, but the collective efforts of everyone who had supported her mission from planning through execution and recovery. She had succeeded because of exceptional teamwork and preparation. Commander Morrison stood at attention in the front row of assembled personnel, his face showing obvious pride in her achievement. When the ceremony concluded and personnel began to disperse, he approached her with a request that would change the direction of her career. The Navy needed instructors for their most elite special operations training programs, and her recent experience made her an ideal candidate. The offer represented a significant career opportunity, but it also meant transitioning from active operations to training the next generation of special operators. Sarah had always assumed that her future lay in continuing operational assignments, but she found herself drawn to the idea of sharing her knowledge and experience with others who would face similar challenges. Over the following days, Sarah discussed the instructor position with Commander Morrison and other senior officers. The role would involve developing new training protocols based on lessons learned from recent operations, including her own mission. She would help prepare future operators for the realities they would face in hostile environments around the world. The decision to accept the instructor position came naturally, as Sarah realized that her most valuable contribution might be in preparing others rather than continuing solo operations. Her experience had given her insights that could benefit countless future missions and potentially save lives through improved training and preparation methods. As Sarah walked through the base on her final day before transferring to the training command, she encountered a young officer who reminded her of herself just months earlier. The woman was clearly nervous about an upcoming deployment, asking questions about what to expect and how to prepare mentally for the challenges ahead. Sarah spent time with the young officer, sharing practical advice while being careful not to reveal classified details about her own mission. She emphasized the importance of trusting training, maintaining focus under pressure, and never underestimating the value of thorough preparation. Most importantly, she stressed that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to function effectively despite it. The conversation reinforced Sarah's decision to become an instructor. She could see how her experience and knowledge could benefit others who would follow similar paths. The Navy needed operators who could succeed in increasingly complex and dangerous environments, and her contribution would be in ensuring they received the best possible preparation. Commander Morrison appeared as she finished her conversation with the young officer. Without words, he quietly removed his hat and rendered a perfect military salute, acknowledging not just her rank and achievements, but her character and dedication to service. The gesture was simple but profound, representing recognition from one warrior to another. Sarah returned the salute with equal precision, understanding that this moment marked the end of one chapter in her life and the beginning of another. She had proven herself as an operator, and now she would prove herself as a leader and mentor. The mission would continue, but her role in it would evolve to meet new challenges and opportunities. As they walked together toward the training command building, Sarah felt confident that her future held new forms of service that would be equally meaningful and challenging. Her story as a special operator was complete, but her story as a leader and instructor was just beginning. The Navy had gained not just a decorated hero, but a mentor who would help shape the next generation of elite warriors.